Let's begin with the main character, that's Anne Frank. The victims of the Holocaust. Anne Frank is the precocious young writer of The Diary of a Young Girl. Her picture emerging from the diary is of a playful yet introspective teen forced to live under extraordinary and trying conditions. Over the course of the diary, Anne seems to grow from an impudent and stubborn girl into an emotionally independent young woman. Despite having a lovely family and several friends, Anne is unable to share her thoughts with any one of them. Instead, she turns to her diary for this purpose. She has a troubled relationship with her mother, who she believes falls short of her ideal mother. She is close to her father, yet in her mind, even he fails to provide her the emotional comfort she seeks. Like any growing teenager, she has a rebellious spirit, desires to be treated as an adult, and hopes to make a name for herself in the world. Accounts of Jewish suffering anguish Anne to the point of remorse at her own good fortune. She is conscious of the demoralizing effect of the cruelty and devastation prevailing in the world outside the secret annex. Nevertheless, she holds on an ideal of honesty, hard work, and self-improvement, and her trust that humans are essentially good. Next we have the Otto Frank, who is the father of Anne Frank. Otto Frank was the only member of his immediate family to have survived the Holocaust, dying much later in the 1980s. Post his marriage to Edith Frank and the birth of their two daughters, Margot and Anne, Otto Frank had immigrated to Holland in 1933 due to his Jewish descent and became the managing director of the Dutch Opekta Company. The diary was published by him in the memory of his daughter. Otto Frank had a remarkable presence of mind and fiercely protective instinct about his family. He was a reassuring and thoughtful figure in their lives. Anne portrayed her father affectionately in the diary, referring to him as the most adorable father. She considered him to be the driving presence in her life, but somehow he fell short of the ideal that she has envisated for him. However, he took a genuine interest in his daughters' lives and education, being an anchor of support for them, and setting an example of being normal and optimistic even under the most extraordinary circumstances. Otto Frank was a man of frugal means, always putting the needs of others before him. A level-headed man, he exhibited considerable tact and patience in the secret annex, talking through decisions and being respectful towards everyone around him, irrespective of their age. Next we have Edith Frank, who is the sister of Anne Frank. Edith Frank plays a prominent role in the book due to the fractious relationship that Anne, her daughter, had with her. The resentment and contempt initially exhibited by Anne later developed into a mature acceptance of their differences. Mrs. Frank was a quiet and reserved person, a nervous sort, unambitious and sentimental. She lacked an independence of spirit, but stood up for her family whenever called upon to do so. Anne and Mrs. Frank were diametrically different in terms of personality and outlook. Anne's growing disillusionment with her family stemmed from Edith Frank's incompetence as a mother who was unable to reach out of her daughter. The pointed references, sarcasm, and rebuffs were a part of Edith Frank's inability to comprehend her daughter, which resulted in the increasing distances between the two. Her inadequacies and shortcomings as a person affected their friendship, alienating Anne from her mother. Mrs. Frank was more ardent to Margot as a person, trying hard to cope with the stress of possible discovery in the secret annex. She is a peaceful person. Next we have Margot Frank. Anne's old sister, Margot Frank, was born in Frankfurt, Main, Germany in 1927. It was the call-up notice for the 16-year-old Margot which set into motion the Frank family's plan of hiding in the secret annex. A sensible, dutiful and obedient young girl, Margot was always absorbed in her studies. She was delicate, spoke little and was content with being on the sidelines. Thus, she was quite similar to her mother in terms of disposition. Anne tells us that her sister was considered to be smart, kind, pretty, and a darling of her parents. Margot had an unobstructive presence. She did not question her circumstances as much as Anne did, and this exasperated her young sister. These are references to Margot's failing health and increasing withdrawal and reclusiveness, indicating that the strain of her life in the annex was taking a toll on her. Like her mother, Margot was always trying to cope up with the constant dread of being discovered and having to behave normally during such difficult times. However, Anne could not help but admire the resilience and grace that Margot exhibited under such circumstances. Anne does not offer much of an insight into her sister's character. However, it is evident that Margot was a girl with impeccable manners and incredible strength of character. Next we have Mr. Van Daan. Mr. Van Daan was Otto Frank's business partner and friend. His family comprised of his wife, Mrs. Van Daan, and son Peter, who came to share the secret annex with the Frank family in order to escape arrest and deportation. Mr. Van Daan was highly opinionated and believed in being pushy to get ahead in the life. He was a man of action who would not rest a moment if there was work to be done. In his good days, he was an amiable and cheerful person, a comforting presence in the household. Although he was a chain smoker and considered uncouth, he was generally more tolerable than his wife. He took a keen interest in the political scenario of that time, usually thrusting his opinions on others. However, Mr. Van Daan found it hard to understand his reticent and repulsive son Peter. This led to misunderstandings and violent argument between the father and the son. A figure of ridicule